tell us about your business. Tell them about the business and what it does, and you know, how does it serve your customers, you know, better than anybody else, and all the things we know. We know a little bit about it. Let's hear, you know, your description of what you do today and why you guys, you know, are great at what you do.
Yeah, that's great. So the purpose of 15.5, you know, what we're trying to do is to really help create extraordinarily highly engaged, high-performing teams by supporting people in becoming their best selves. So we have this idea of best self-management. We're in the performance management space. We work with CEOs and COOs and VPs and heads of people who are looking for a performance management solution. And we're actually saying, great, we can sell you a performance management solution, but you should actually think of it as a best self-management solution. Because the idea is, if you actually create environments that support people in being and becoming their best selves, then engagement and performance and loyalty and all these other things are the natural byproduct. Create an extraordinary culture where people are psychologically safe, they're intrinsically motivated, they're connected to purpose. You create a culture of positivity and gratitude, and it's amazing what can happen. And so the question is, for us, how do we solve that for companies? How do we, A, get them connected to that vision, and then provide the tools and the software and the services and education to make it all work? So we started out with a very, very simple, you know, our entry to the market, which is indicative of the name 15.5, is a very, very simple manager practice that the founder of Patagonia used to use back in the 80s and was interviewed in Inc. magazine in the March 1988 issue of Inc. magazine about. In fact, it was the thing, a friend of mine turned me on to the concept, and the title of the article was, "I'm sorry, Yvonne's out surfing," which was the answer he would get every time the reporter called to try to interview him. And so she finally got him and said, "How are you running this company if you're always out surfing?" He said, "Well, I didn't start this company to work 50 weeks a year. You know, I'm a mountaineer, I'm a surfer, I want to be out testing the equipment and being out in the world. And one of the things I do is I do this thing called 515 reports, where I have every employee in the company spend 15 minutes a week writing a report that takes their manager no more than 5 minutes to read." And it creates this agile communication cadence where employees feel like they have a voice, managers are informed naturally, and the most important things bubble up to me wherever I am in the world. And so I looked at that and said, well, geez, if he can build Patagonia working half the year, who wouldn't want this practice for their companies?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we built that. Personally, I mean, you know, being a kite surfer and a skier, I'd love to be able to work half the year and be able to work from anywhere. So I said, well, let's try to do this thing. If we can, you know, kind of provide an amazing amount of value for the leaders and also have the employees feel a sense of autonomy and like they have a voice, that sounds like a win-win to me. So we built this very simple product, which is just what we now call the 15.5 check-in, which happens to be a wonderful tool now for this age of remote work that a lot of people are being forced into in this moment in time, where it's an asynchronous check-in where employees get to say, okay, here's how I'm feeling. Here's how I'm doing against my strategic objectives, or what we call OKRs, objectives and key results. Here are my priorities for next week relative to the ones I did last week. This is what's working. This is where I'm challenged. And they get a chance to do something called high fives, which is a peer appreciation practice where they can give high fives to anyone in the organization. And it just takes 15 minutes of reflection to do that update, which we found actually has inherent value for the employee themselves, because they're reflecting on their own week, their own progress. There's a lot of positive psychology built into it, because one of the things that we found is that we're wired with a negativity bias as human beings. We're wired to look for what's wrong and where the threats are. And so we actually have to counteract that by consciously focus. This is why gratitude practices are actually, they help rewire your neurology to be more positive oriented. So people who have gratitude practices will often share, they have a better experience of life. So inside of 15.5, we're asking people to self-reflect on how they're feeling. We're asking them to start reflecting on what's going well before they share their challenges. We're asking them to share gratitude or appreciation for their coworkers. And again, it starts to create a very different orientation for them as an employee, and also their experience of work and with their peers. And then on top of that, then as a leader, you then get, in a very quick amount of time, you get visibility into what's happening with each one of your direct reports, wherever they are in the world. So when you do have FaceTime and one-on-ones, which we also provide, we've extended the platform far beyond just the check-in. You can, as you're reading somebody's check-in, you can say, okay, let me add these 2 or 3 things to our next one-on-one agenda. Then your employee is adding their items to the one-on-one agenda. So when we actually get together on Zoom or in person, I know exactly what we're going to be talking about. We don't need to waste time getting all the updates, and we can dig in on the most critical things. So today the platform looks like we've got that 15.5 check-in. You've got dashboards for your objectives across the whole company that can cascade from company-wide down to department to individual. You've got an ability to facilitate one-on-ones. You've got this high five feed, which can integrate to wherever you're doing work, like in Slack or whatnot. And then we do our take on the performance review, which we call the Best Self Review, is designed to be more lightweight and regular. It can happen anywhere from 2 to 4 times a year, where we're not just looking backward and grading people and assessing their performance, but also supporting them and identifying their strengths and how to put those into action in the future so they can continue to grow and get better. And now, today, we've also combined that with the 15.5 Best Self Academy, which is an online learning platform where we've just launched the forever free Best Self Manager training certification that anyone can take to learn all the principles on how to up-level their manager and have your result not only be producing better work product, but creating extraordinary culture with your team and helping people actually get better and not just, do the best they can in their current state.
So is this a consulting business that consults to businesses, or you can take it, you can buy it online, or tell me about, is this person consultant to leader? How does this engage with businesses, and what type of businesses are you guys? What's your wheelhouse? What are you super strong? What's your niches?
We're first and foremost a software company, so and we have a few different ways we go to market. So for companies, say up to 100 employees, you can just go right onto the website, sign up, and then you can start using it with your team, your entire company. And in the midst of the pandemic that we're currently experiencing, as I mentioned to you prior, we've decided to just give away 15.5 for those teams of up to 50 through June 15th to hopefully support them in reducing some of the stress of having to go remote so dramatically, so quickly. For teams, say 100 to 1,000 employees, we do a bit of a more consultative sale. And we tend to work with more progressively oriented companies who realize that their competitive advantage lies in the performance of their people. Mm-hmm. And, most of our customers have the vast majority of their employees who will use 15.5 are doing their work through computers. So it's knowledge work. It's not necessarily like cafe workers or people on the factory floor, but it's folks who are using a computer, which is a large percentage of the workforce today. And so, and then from say 1,000 to 5,000 employee teams and companies, we also have an enterprise group that also combines services alongside the software.
Cool. And do you feel like the core values align with most of the companies you're serving eventually after this product is serving? Do they end up relooking at values and core values often? I mean, tell about how that stuff interacts. The existing core values and culture that's there. If it's not that strong, yes. How does your product strengthen them? Those values and the culture.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that one of the things that we're really strong at is culture, and it makes sense. So, if you look at some of the things, the awards that we've won, we were rated number 3 on Glassdoor's Best Companies to Work For. We're on Inc.'s Best Workplaces list. We've been on a couple different Fortune lists. And so we talk a lot about the importance of culture and core values and mission. Our product doesn't specifically impact those things, but we have a lot of education around it for leaders. In fact, in this concept of best self management, which is the philosophy that we talk about a lot, we've broken it down into 3 pillars to create what we call a best self culture, which is a culture that really brings out the best in your people and has them be on a continual path of learning and growth and contribution, which is counter to what happens in most organizations, where if you're not tuned into this, usually what happens is companies devolve into silos, drama, politics, blame, you get a lot of gossip, all those kinds of things. So that's kind of the default, I would say if you're not putting any attention on these things. And then we're trying to create, the opposite end of that pendulum. And we say that, the first and foremost, you need to create a really powerful shared context, powerful and inspiring shared context. And for most companies, that's your mission, vision, values. But we extend it to the level of psychological safety that you're creating for your people, the agreements that you have, the principles you operate by, all these kinds of things, the social norms that we're going to opt in on. Then you need the systems to actually support people in identifying their strengths and learning and growing. That's the best self pillar. But just having the shared context and the structure to help people learn and grow isn't going to get you all the way there, because all those people are interacting with other people. And if you have relational friction, you have organizational friction.
Yep.
So the third pillar is what we call cultivate relational mastery. And so we provide a lot of education on how to create high order relating skills and relational mastery skills where, the inevitable upset or conflict can be resolved in a really good way and leave the relationship even stronger. Things like assuming positive intent, delivering truth with kindness. There's a number of key things that we talk about in order to how to create, how to give and receive challenging feedback in a way that kind of leaves the relationship stronger as opposed to coming from a place of blame. And so we teach on a lot of those things. So I would say that using the product itself, which is what we did up until just this last year, that's all we sold was the product, would have cultural benefits for our clients because it would promote more positivity and transparency. And that starts to evolve, even if you're not saying, hey, go ahead and change your values. It starts to change the relational dynamics inside the company. And it's almost like a Trojan horse inside out approach that, 3 months, 6 months, a year later, things are just working better. Your people are communicating better. They're more open. They're more trusting. They're sharing more positivity through high fives and things like that. And now with the education piece, we're helping companies do that also top down by being more explicit about it and setting their intentions and evolving their values if they're not strong enough.
And David, I found one of the points particularly interesting where you mentioned that humanity is inherently negatively biased.
Yes.
To a certain extent, I think that's probably an accurate statement.
For good reason, though. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Flight or flight.
Yes.
Norepinephrine exists for a reason. But I guess I'm interested to understand that with a little bit more depth, the way that you guys are able to first confront that there is an issue that needs to be solved. Second, how do you change that shift, or how do you shift them to accept the change and then be willing to implement? But then more importantly, kind of going back to where you had with your broadcasting days back in high school,
yes.
How does that stay and last forever?
Yeah.
As opposed to reverting back to where they originated from.
Yeah, so I would say it happens on a number of levels. So the first is that, a customer is going to come to us primarily because they want better performance from their team. They want better results. It's just as simple as that. The how we go about doing it is a little bit different than other companies in our space. And they don't even need to buy into the whole philosophy if they don't want to. They just want a structure for better managing their teams. Great. We offer that. It starts to have some of these, it starts to work on the people because, again, we're partnered with a number of the leading institutions like the University of Michigan Center for Positive Organizations, where we're tapped into some of the science coming out of Wharton. We have a director of people science who just completed the Masters in Positive Psychology from Wharton and is connected with a lot of the academics there. So our product is informed by all of the science that you don't even need to know how it works and why. Just by using the product, some of these things start to shift. That said, if people really want to make more of a dramatic change, then we're educating them on that tendency, right? So the human tendency is to look for what's wrong because we need to stay safe. Or, the anecdote, or what do they call it? People often say that, our brains are wired for us to survive, not to thrive.
Right.
And that makes sense. I mean, we've evolved in a time where there's a lot of danger. There's a lot less danger than there is. And so we still have this, saber-toothed tiger fight or flight response that we get. But it tends to be more ego danger and emotional danger than it is physical in our current environment. But when you're in that sense of lack of safety, whether it's I'm just triggered in a conversation with you, or I feel like I have an organization where there's backstabbing and I have to cover my butt, what happens is you can't relax, and you're coming from that, maybe not always that fight or flight space, but you're coming from a place of self-preservation, and you're making decisions that are in your best interest, not necessarily in the company's best interest. And so, if companies really want to transform that and get the best out of their people working together toward a common purpose, they need to understand that the first thing to do is they've got to create a very high level of psychological safety, frankly, an uncommon level of psychological safety. And it maps really, it's so interesting, the way our brains are actually wired map very much to Maslow's hierarchy, which you may have studied in high school or later, that says that we have these hierarchy of needs. It starts with our physiology, then our safety needs, then our needs for belonging, our needs for self-esteem. When those four needs are met, we're relaxed, right? We can move into that possibility of what Maslow called self-actualization, what we call best self, which is characterized by an up spiral of growth and contribution. Now, if my self-esteem is at threat, or my sense of belonging is at threat, again, I go back into that fear mode, and I'm trying to preserve myself. And I think companies historically have thought like, okay, we just need to provide for the physiology. We're going to create a building people can work in, and there's bathrooms and exits. And we're going to provide for safety. No one's going to come in here and kill you. But they don't provide for belonging and esteem. And so when those needs aren't met, again, you have people walking around in that state of not feeling safe psychologically. And so when you create psychological safety, a couple things you do is you create a really, really strong sense of we and a strong sense of belonging. And the second thing is the best antidote to people having issues around their own self-esteem is help them reflect on and identify what their unique ability is and what their strengths are. And then help them align that to their work. Because then what happens is they start getting this great feedback loop of like, wow, I'm actually good at something and I can get better. And their peers start to notice and they get positive feedback. And when that happens, when you've got all of those kind of fundamental Maslow needs met in the workplace, and the workplace is not necessarily responsible for providing them, but is architecting a culture that can help to create the right systems and trainings for manager to make sure those things get met, then what you have is people who come together who are just like so enthusiastic about the company and the culture that they're going to do the best work of their lives. And if you overlay that with kind of the science of intrinsic motivation, which says you need purpose, which is, back to the Simon Sinek stuff, you need to have a clear purpose that everyone's aligned on, whether it's the company's purpose of the teams. You need to give people a sense of autonomy. You need to give them a sense of the ability to find mastery, which relates to that unique ability concept and learning and growing. And then you need to have them be connected through like relatedness, which again maps to Maslow's sense of belonging. And we call it the intrinsic motivation ramp: relatedness, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. You design for that, and all sorts of great things then happen. Then you can layer on things like accountability structures, like aligning goals and having weekly check-ins, and they're just going to work so much better. So companies that really want to go 100% in that direction with us, we've got a whole transformational services group that'll go in, feet on the ground, and help you actually make that cultural shift. But again, we don't do that with everybody, and you don't have to. You could just use the software product and get some good gains.
Yeah, there's a ton of layers that could go into this.
Yes.
That's amazing. And so then when it comes to the long run, are you guys measuring success off of an NPS score? Is it off of increased revenues, or what is the correlation there?
Yeah, today we're measuring Net Promoter Score for ourselves, for sure. We have a lot of, anecdotally, we get a lot of feedback from our customers who say, wow, I don't know how I ever lived without this with the software product. Because once you start having the structure of being in dialogue with people through those weekly check-ins, like really understand not only what people are doing, but how they're feeling, where they're struggling. And for me as a leader, as I mentioned, I sit here in Sedona, Arizona. My leadership team, I've got leadership team members in San Francisco, Raleigh, North Carolina, New York City, Boston, Utrecht in the Netherlands. Not only do I get updates from all of my team over the weekend, but I actually see all the high fives they're getting from their teams. And so I have this incredible window into how they're perceived as leaders, what work is happening. and I could be anywhere in the world and have my finger on the pulse of my whole organization, which is really remarkable. So that's, that's just one piece there.
So do you really need the concept of 360s, right? Do you need to do 360s, or does this really serve a purpose where they're not necessary because it does the same thing and better?
I think we do incorporate 360s as an option into the best self review. So think about I think about the feedback loops and the different kinds of feedbacks on different horizons of time. So the weekly reflection and the weekly check-in gives you the day-to-day assessment. Okay, things are going well or they're not. I need to have conversations. It's about what the work is now. We've already defined our objectives. We're in the 13 weeks of the quarter, and we're just executing. I can tell you at 6 weeks into the quarter, if someone's key objective goes from green to yellow, I still have 6 or 7 weeks to work with them to get it back on track. Whereas most people set their goals in January, and then they check in on April 1st and say, how did we do? When there's zero time to actually do anything about it. So the weekly check-ins about the reflecting on actually, are we making the right progress now? And then on a quarterly or twice a year basis, that's where we do a review that might include a 360 or not. So you can decide, I want manager feedback and peer feedback, or I just want upward feedback. So you can structure your review process throughout the year to include 360s, which is more of a, let's now take a step back and be a little more reflective about the longer term, how things are going. So I think they're both useful, but what we do find is that those weekly check-ins will inform when you do your best self reviews, because you're no longer influenced by what we call the recency bias. Most people have, there's a psychological term called recency bias, that we tend to put a lot more weight on the things that have recently happened versus over a period of time. So if I'm reviewing someone over 6 months or a year, really the last 4 to 6 weeks are going to influence me more heavily, and I might not be as balanced. So what's nice is you can look back through all those check-ins and all the high fives and all the goals and get more and have more of a balanced assessment of the person at a point in time. And then that recency bias then becomes a benefit, because you can say, oh, I can actually see you've been trending really well, but the last 3 weeks is problematic. Maybe I need to lean in and have a conversation and see if there's something going on in your personal life. That kind of thing.
That sounds awesome.